Thanks, Liz, and welcome to this webinar. It's good to have the opportunity to share with you some information around employment obligations during this really challenging time for employers and employees. So we've got a presentation which Adrian's going to put up and we'll work our way through that. First of all, just introducing the team as myself as Director of 360 Consult, and with me I've got two Senior Associates, Lynn Booker, who has an extensive background in MB as a Senior Labour Inspector and as an Employment Mediator, and Adrian Tocker, who's been an associate with us for about just over a year now. And Adrian does a lot of work involved with collective bargaining and representation. I've been engaged in doing this kind of work for about 41 years. So it's an interesting new period to be part of. So thanks, Adrian. If we could slip over to the next slide. There are going to be various of us that will talk to these slides as we go through the process. So the first comment that I want to make is that with this COVID-19 environment, what we're focused on is, as well as the wider community, where we're looking to keep us healthy as a nation, there are particular health risks to employees and other people affected in the workplace environment for those that are continuing to work in essential businesses. And there are also impacts for people who are now working at home, because in both environments we need to make sure that we are following a health and safety approach to workplace practices, whether at the normal workplace or at home. So it's not just the Employment Relations Act or employment agreement obligations that we've got to watch out for. We've got to take care that we're dealing with our obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act. That's also a very important part of it. And we would recommend that employers think about and engage with their employees about safe work practices in the home if they are working from home. So the general commitment that the government is asking employers to do is to take a practical and pragmatic approach to how we manage in this environment. You will have seen, no doubt, that there's a lot of debate amongst legal practitioners about what the responsibilities and duties of employers are in relation to their employees. There are some who say, no work equals no pay. There are some who say that the employment relationship sustains, and just because a third party, being government, have decreed that for most businesses you can't be at work and you've got no work being done while people are sitting at home, that there is still a responsibility to pay them. However, what we've got is a wage subsidy that Adrian's going to talk about in a few minutes. And I think the key thing that we need to remember is that there are employment law obligations and that survive this whole process, and that those obligations continue to be in play through this period. Just because COVID-19's come along, just because Alert Level 4's come along, does not discount employment law obligations. So we've got a situation where there are quite a lot of people working from home, and if they are working fully, then there's an opportunity to support them by engaging in a positive and proactive way in terms of how we utilise the work and get it done. As in our own team, we have Zoom meetings early in the morning and late in the day so that we catch up with each other about where we're at. And I know that a number of our clients have organised it so that they have intact team meetings on a regular basis so that they keep connected with each other. Now, obviously, essential services continue to operate, and there are some definitions around that, and it's apparent also that government is continuing to refine what's deemed to be an essential business and a non-essential business. Thanks, Adrian. The next slide. So one of the things that's really important in this environment around employment obligations is that we've got to continue to deal with each other in good faith. What that means is that we've got to be active and constructive in maintaining the employment relationship. So one of the things that we recommend is that there is a really well-defined communication channels that are set up, and that there is regular communication. One of the things that creates people getting upset is the fact that they don't hear stuff. It's best that employers are engaging with their employees through this process on a regular basis, so that there are email communications, there may be Zoom communications, whatever levels of communications that you can have are really important. Now, for many employers, there is the reality of the situation that change, including restructuring, including for some businesses, complete closure of the business, is the reality that they're facing. That the fact that that is caused by COVID-19 doesn't mean that we can just make a unilateral decision and take action to close the business. We still need to take a good faith process into any restructure or any change that is sought to be made. So it's important to provide information that's relevant to any proposal that you've got, and to give employees the opportunity to comment on it. And it also means, in this interesting environment, that you give people the opportunity for a support person or representative to be part of the process. Now, that's caused already some interesting engagements, because employees have had support people on Zoom as well, and the issues are discussed on a continuing basis with that multiple Zoom people in the process. Okay, moving to the next slide. Adrian, talk about the subsidy. Can't hear you.
If I unmute myself, yeah, if I unmute myself, that'll help. The wage subsidy, we have received lots of questions, and that's largely because, as we've seen over the last 7 days, it seems to change daily in terms of what is and isn't and how it can be applied. And I think as we work our way through it over time, some of the, I guess, unintended consequences that have arisen from the government, they've tended to provide more clarification and allowed, you know, a bit more leeway in terms of how the whole process can be applied. As we know, on the weekend they removed the leave payment ability, largely because it required a certain level of someone having to go into self-isolation or care for dependents in self-isolation. So as from, I think, the 28th at 4 p.m, that disappeared and was rolled into the wage subsidy. So people that applied for it before then would still get it, but anything after that had to go through the wage subsidy application process. So there is obviously some qualifying criteria, which you see on the slide there, that you need to be obviously a registered business, experienced a minimum 30% decline in actual or perceived revenue, and that should be related to the impact of COVID-19 mitigations and steps taken. And the business itself has to look at taking some active steps to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. Now, there's a wide range of those. But as we said, part of this and what's signed off in the declaration is the second point, is that you must not make any changes to your obligations under the employment agreement, including things like rates of pay, hours of work, leave entitlements, without the written agreement of an employee. Now, while the government has indicated that they want businesses to continue to pay people at 80%, it was very unclear in the early stages. In fact, a lot of people thought that was a requirement in terms of receiving the wage subsidy. We didn't think that was the case, and it's subsequently been clarified that that isn't. And I'll flick on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about that. As we would expect, employees had to be legally entitled to work, but for the period of the subsidy, you've got to do your best endeavours or try your hardest. And I think that's what caused a lot of confusion. What is best endeavours? In legal jargon, that's quite a high threshold to achieve. But I think what we've seen from the government is indicating that it's not the same definition as what were trying to convey. So look at what the options are to continue to provide cash, to provide at least up to 80% of an employee's wages or salary. But if it's not possible, or the business doesn't want to make some of those sacrifices, like taking on more debt, it doesn't necessarily have to go up to 80%, but you do need to be very clear about the reasons that you are not looking to pass on 80%, which, if you think back, does conflict with the thing that you can't make changes to your employment agreement, but we'll talk about that in a sec. So you had to at least pay the full amount of the subsidy to the employee. So if you can't keep some of it, you need to pass all of it on to employees. The one exception, which was clarified on the weekend, was where the ordinary wages or salary of an employee named in the application was below the amount of the subsidy before the impact. You should pay the employee that amount. And it's since even had more clarification as of yesterday that any excess above their ordinary wages could be taken and applied to other employees to top up their wages. And that was very much a question over the first few days. And could people do this, especially for businesses where there was a lot of part-time employees, might have been doing 5, 6, 8 hours a week, were suddenly going to get paid $350 because that was passing on the full amount of the subsidy for those that were below the 20 hours. And for a lot of people, that didn't make any sense, given they might have only earned $120, $200 a week at current, because they were only working a short amount of hours, to suddenly get a pay rise through this. Didn't make any sense and didn't sound like a great use of taxpayer money. So subsequently, that has been clarified. Yep, so I think in terms of that is probably the gist of the wage subsidy. Paul, if you want to take me through some of the examples.
So just talking a few examples, and this is some examples that we've pre-looked at, and we've also got some questions that we looked at before that have come from people. So a worker in an essential service business believes they're at risk of spreading COVID-19, although technically not required to self-isolate under the Ministry of Health guidance. So this is about belief, and the key here is that where we are waiting for more guidance from the government about support for employees in essential service businesses who believe that they need to self-isolate because, for example, they're over 70, because, for example, they are immune compromised, or they are caring for people in that space, or they are unsure about risk of going outside their bubble at home and then going back into the bubble, because going outside the bubble to go to work and then coming back inside the bubble, and what do they bring with them? We're looking for more guidance, although it's fair to note that government, Prime Minister acknowledged a couple of large employers who in the supermarket world who were actually voluntarily paying people who felt that they needed to self-isolate. So that was that's been an interesting watch. So the second question is around wanting employees to use annual leave while a workplace is temporarily closed. One of the things in one of the statements in the declaration that you, if you've signed up to the wage subsidy, is that you can't unlawfully compel people to take leave. Now, unlawfully compel is the critical phrase. There are situations where an employer and an employee may discuss the taking of annual leave, and if there can't be an agreement, then the employer has the right under the Holidays Act to give 14 days notice of annual leave. However, you then get a situation potentially where people are taking annual leave, and if you're in receipt of the wage subsidy, then you are using the annual leave to subsidise, you're using the wage subsidy to subsidise the annual leave payment. So that's the third question. Yes, you can use that subsidy to offset leave payments to employees. Although what some employers are doing is they are using the wage subsidy and then using leave to top up from the level of the wage subsidy of 58580 or the 350 or the lower amount if that's what they actually would have been paid. So there are some employers that can't afford to top up out of a discretionary amount of money, and they're giving employees the opportunity to use all types of leave to top up. What do I pay employees who are working from home but who can't do 100% of their job? So that's a conversation that you need to have with your employees. It's really important that we take what my colleague James Crichton, ex-chief of the authority, who's on our team these days, and he says that, look, the government is attempting to encourage employees to be pragmatic and practical. So what do you need to do? You need to talk to your people and work out what's going to work best for you and for the employee. So if an assessment around 80% of pay is what you can do, or even some other number, then work to get some understanding and agreement with each other. So it's important that where businesses are in a position to support their employees, then they do so. But it's also important that businesses get real, because they've got to support themselves to be able to sustain and come out of what happens next in terms of a recovery. There may well be further support from government in terms of the recovery budget, which will come in May. But in the meantime, businesses, I think, have got a responsibility in terms of their employment obligations to look after as best they can the health and well-being of their business and do what they can. And as the Minister of Finance has said, and it's now leaked its way into the declaration itself, for businesses to try their hardest. So whilst there's that high threshold for best endeavours, it's also about business trying their hardest to do the best that they can in these situations. So I'll just slip over now to Lynn to talk about public holidays very quickly, so that we can get Lynn to talk about that, and then we'll do some more direct Q&A.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. I know that a question for a lot of you is, what's going to happen coming up to these public holidays in April? And as Paul says, this is unusual times, but the legislation, and certainly minimum code legislation like the Holidays Act, as of today, hasn't had any changes. We don't know if anything will come out to change these, how we treat public holidays, but at the moment, no changes. So Good Friday, Easter Monday and Anzac Day coming up, we know that if those days are a day that your workers would have otherwise worked, your obligations are still the same to pay relevant daily pay. The question is now, what is relevant daily pay? Because if you've had conversations with your team and you've got agreement, for example, to take a lesser hourly rate, to work less hours, and there's agreement, relevant daily pay, of course, is less. The only hook is going to be if in your employment agreements you have contractually agreed that you're going to pay average daily pay for your public holidays. That's a concept that came in a few years ago, and it said that it's a fallback position. If you cannot establish what relevant daily pay is, relevant daily pay being what a person would have earned had they have worked, then you can have this fallback position of calculating how much that employee worked in the last 12 months. But in essence, the public holidays that are coming up, no change. During the lockdown, you're still required to make sure in your wage and time records you've got that as a public holiday, and in your wage and time records you've calculated relevant daily pay for that period and paid it. At this stage, oh sorry, I sort of jumped ahead. There's been no change to the Holidays Act. It's still the same. If the employee does not work on a day, they still have to be, but it's a day they would have normally worked, they must be paid for it. If we see any legislative changes coming up, we'll put that on our blog, but at the moment that's where that's it. A little wee bit before we go into sick and bereavement leave, just going back on what Paul talked about, requiring a person, that an employer can require a person to take annual leave. Just a reminder to you, yep, the Act says that you can do that, but make sure it is annual leave entitlement and not accrued leave. So that means the annual leave that employee has banked since their last anniversary. Going on to sick, bereavement and alternate leave now, again, nothing has changed. If an employee is sick and has entitlement available to them, suffers a bereavement and has entitlement, or takes an alternate day that's owed to them, they must be paid the amount that they would have earned on the day as if they'd have worked it. In fact, a little bit to be mindful of coming up, especially with the shop trading. Adrian, I think that you're a little more up to speed on this with the shop trading days changing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would have seen what was announced yesterday in terms of the shop trading requirements, that the supermarkets in particular were going to be closed for the Good Friday so they could restock their shelves, but they will be able to be open on Easter Sunday, which is different to the usual shop trading rules. So they'll work through whatever legal mechanisms they need to do that will allow businesses that are essential services to be open on that Easter Sunday this time.
Thanks, Paul.
So we've put in our slides just some key contact points to get information. There's the official site, and we also on that official site you can actually hook into a daily newsletter. So if you go to COVID-19, you can find how to actually register for a daily update from government around COVID-19 matters. And I found that very useful. Just comes every day, and it just gives an update. It's good work. Ministry of Health, you can get more detail around how the whole issue of where COVID-19 is happening. And I looked at some modelling stuff that they came through yesterday, and that scared me as well. But however, I'm glad that we're collectively taking the action that we are to suppress that peak. And but there's some interesting information there. Obviously, Employment in New Zealand has some material, and we are through our website constantly updating our frequently asked questions.
Just another thing on that Ministry of Health website, what I did notice they've put in over the last few days is guidance for organisations around PPE requirements for different situations. I think that's been quite topical. A lot of the feedback we've had, and we see it on the news where people are saying, "Oh, we need to give people masks." Well, the official Ministry of Health and WHO information is that if you're healthy, you don't actually need a mask. However, you need to listen to the concerns of your employers when you're working through that and find out and work out what is going to be the best for your situation. So don't discount it, but it's useful to know the information in the current lines.
So just one other point around Healthline. If people are self-isolating, and if we get back to having some money being paid for people to self-isolate, then one of the rules will be a registration with Healthline. Healthline's so is there for a registration purpose, but it's also there for the purpose of getting information and also getting support. Also, there is the counselling and support environment where you can call or text 1713, which is again a key element for people who are feeling in crisis.
All right. And I haven't got work and income's number up there who are managing the wage subsidy, but I do know from a lot of the comments and feedback that I've seen it is incredibly difficult to get through to them. Some people have been waiting for days, and I see that in some of our Q&A. It is challenging, and to be perfectly honest, I think they're actually doing a pretty good job, but this is just at an unprecedented level that they just are struggling to cope with. They don't have enough bodies and hadn't anticipated this. So most of it is just them taking the time to work through the volume of work that they've got in front of them.
Okay, just a little bit about us. The work that we can do to support employers in this environment is, as we're doing, providing a lot of support, advice and information through a variety of mechanisms, because that's, in our view, the right thing to do. If you need more in-depth support, then that's something that we're available to do right through the whole of the environment. And we are also have developed COVID conciliation sessions. So what we're doing in the absence of an environment where you can actually be face to face and have a mediated type of situation, that we're building the ways and the experience, particularly led by Lynn, around how to actually support difficult employment situations in a face-to-face session via Zoom.